Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict. We're going to jump right into the 66 Lincoln Continental Convertible. It does say project, but I do believe this is a special car in some ways. It's really a time capsule. So let's take a look at it. Now, if we jump over to Hagerty, remember I'm a customer of Hagerty. If you've been watching my videos, and I can log in here and take a look at what the valuation tool shows, and 26,200 all the way up to 104K. The 66, 67 Lincoln Continental convertibles, I don't think get enough love, but we're starting to kind of see those prices tick up over the course of time. So with this car, it basically ends in 5 days. I think it went live about 2 days ago. And I will tell you, it was entered on 5/1 just 2 days ago via the Lincoln registry. So I pasted in the VIN. It's as simple as copying and pasting. It is there. The special thing about this car, I think, is the fact that when I say time capsule, basically what we're looking at is a 66 that is said to have resided in Erie, PA since new, and it was stored from 1978, the great year I was born, in November on the 23rd, but in 78 all the way to 3 months ago, February 2024. And I think that's definitely a special thing because it's kind of a time capsule. Again, I mean, that's 45, 46 years. And what you're going to find is you would think that, hey, pulling this car out of a garage or barn is, nothing's going to work. Well, that's actually contrary. They put a little bit of money into it, and I think someone can get a really, really nice car, in my opinion, if they were to take the plunge on this one. It does have a light beige color, which I do totally dig, and although so many people want a black Lincoln, to me, it's nice to see non-black Lincolns. They are very clear about some of the minor cosmetic things. As you can imagine, if this car was sitting in a garage for 46 years, give or take, it's not going to be perfect. And that's why I wouldn't even go as far. They put project in the title, but I think it's far from that. You could either restore this one or kind of go about just leaving it as is for the most part. It talks about, of course, the interior. And what I would say is it's an air-conditioned car, and I totally dig, if you've been watching this channel, I totally dig these original interiors. I really love the leather. I've got a chance to see so many of these cars from our friend Chris at Lincoln Land. I always like to shout out Chris. If you guys need parts for these cars, hit up Lincoln Land in Clearwater. But I've seen so many of his original cars, and he kind of has that same love for these original interiors that I do. And to me, the leather is so soft, and a lot of times this stuff you can add conditioning to it, and sure, you're going to look at it and say, hey, there's some cracks and things. That's typically how these seats will look, but certainly you could get a professional to kind of come in here and clean them up, or you could do that yourself, but surely these do not look bad. We'll talk a little bit about some of the differences in 66 that I like, which includes the seats, kind of the lower back seats. The seats, for the most part, were the same from 61 to 66, and then in 67, you have some additional safety type things that kind of come in, bigger headrests, things like that. The seats do take on a little bit different look. As you can imagine, this engine sitting 462, very, very strong engine, and that's what we see here, kind of an authentic engine bay. I think, if I remember correctly, in 66 and 67, the shrouds here were made of a fiberglass type material. Rest in peace, Tim Nill from the Lincoln Ranch years ago. He used to often repair these. That was kind of a service that he had offered. But what we see here is, again, an engine bay that you could certainly bring back to its original glory if that's something that you wanted to do. Now, I would be concerned out of the gate, knowing this car came from the Pennsylvania area. My wife came from North Pennsylvania. That's where she grew up. And we know harsher winters there and things like that. But contrary to my thought, when I look at some of the undercarriage photos that we'll look at, this car to me really looks solid underneath. So even though from 66 to 78, let's say it was driven, 70, 80,000 miles, whatever that number was above, whoever had this car did take care of it, and it doesn't appear that they really drove it in harsh conditions. It's not perfect underneath, certainly, but you're going to find it's not too bad, in my opinion, based upon what we can see in the photos. It's always good to get eyes on it. We know this car, based upon 07A, the A stands for January. That's the first letter in the alphabet. So A equals January, and then 07. So this would have been January 7th of 1966. Remember, the production would have began in August, September of 65. It was a Buffalo, New York ordering district, or DSO. So again, that could give a little bit of insight. It's possible it was just ordered there. And then, of course, as they had alluded, they think that it spent its entire existence in Erie, Pennsylvania. Here's some of the basic sequencing information. The 28544, that's the 28,544th created or produced, if you will. Now, I'm going to give you a little insight. I typically will share a screenshot of this, but what I've done is I've highlighted on my personal spreadsheet basically the 66 numbers, and 3,180 were produced. And I actually put this together here, which I'm going to highlight if I can. And what I want to reinforce is, when you look at, I know a lot of times, folks go, well, I'm not a fan of the 66, 67s. Everyone has their preference, and that's fine. But if you look at it, the 66 is the fourth highest selling convertible out of those 7 years. So 65 and 64, 62, those came in about 3,300 to 3,200. When you get to 66, 3,180 were produced. And then, of course, 63, believe it or not, 61 and 67 were less than that. Now, the number isn't very far off in 63, and then 61, 67. The first year and the last year of the production, those were the lowest. Those were the only 2 years in the 2,000 range in terms of production. But it gives you a little bit of insight. Often you'll see, again, folks comment and go, well, I don't like the 66. It's not as, beautiful as the early 1s, 2s, 3s, so on. Again, personal preference. I'm a huge fan. I've always been a huge fan of 66, 67. I prefer 66 more. That's a personal preference based upon some of the interior and things like that. I've said this before, and if you did not know, folks will have a hard time, and I used to as well, telling these years apart. The biggest tell is you've got the star on the 66, and then, of course, you've got a different bar count. So if you look at this front three-quarter shot, and then you looked at a side-by-side of a 67, you can easily tell the bar count is different. I think it's 2 different. Maybe it's 11 versus 13. I always kind of forget. But certainly I can look at this, and I think it's even like a little bit more streamlined than the 67. But basically what I want to do is look at some of the photos here. And for a car that sat for 45 plus years, it actually looks really good. And although they put project in the title, certainly you're going to see, in my opinion, it's not really a project car. We've seen project cars that are non-running, non-driving, top doesn't work. That is not the situation here. There's a ton of photos on here, and I always put the link in the description of these videos. The top works, which is fantastic. The windows work. It's not clear if the auto drops work, but certainly that would be the least of my worries. If you could still put the windows up and down, that's fantastic because you can use the front or the rear window switches for that. Again, when you look underneath this car, I would think that it would be a lot worse than what it is, but certainly they do provide a good amount of photos, and I've seen far worse. It's not perfect. You're going to have some minor imperfections and things like that in here. This is a car to me that you can potentially get into and begin enjoying right away, and then decide if you want to, re-chrome bumpers and things like that and go that extra mile. I had a 67, and it was very common, in these areas here to kind of build up some surface rust. A lot of times there are some remedies that you can use to get in here and kind of clean this up, or have it high-speed polished and whatnot to kind of get rid of some of that surface rust. But certainly this isn't anything to be concerned with. If you got these bumpers re-chromed, that stuff would look brand new. They're being very thorough with what they're showing, and it is hard to kind of tell in this rear quarter panel if, there's anything kind of going on underneath here. Was this, rusted out at one point and someone put body filler, aka Bondo, in there? It's kind of hard to tell. That is usually a suspect area on these cars, as you may have noticed from some of the past videos. They put this car onto a lift, and again, they're kind of showcasing, I've seen bumper ends far worse, because these are kind of big boats, if you will. You could see down here, there are some dents and dings. The bumpers are not perfect, and those are some things to kind of call out. Again, this car is not perfect, nor would I expect it to be. I love when they show the photo inside the fuel filler here. It kind of just gives you a little bit of insight to how good it looks in here. And then you do have, this was a feature in 66, 67, where you could come back here, put the key in, turn it left, turn it right to put the top up or down, which is certainly an awesome feature. Again, we've got the interior. You can see a little bit of what I like to call the dinginess, which I dig. I know some people would want to get in here and begin cleaning it up immediately. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. You'll see some discoloration here and on this package tray, interior pieces here a little bit, but certainly I dig one of our favorite words, the rattiness, if you will, of it. But I could see why someone would want to put it back to its original glory. With the top, you can get these tops from Jim Wallace out of Florida. I have mentioned his company before. He's got a basic website, but he sells on eBay, and you could certainly end up getting those from him if you wanted to. Something else that I noticed is it does have the speed control. This is fairly uncommon in 66, 67. I mean, I've seen it before, but it's not something you'll see a lot of. You could probably get in here and clean up a lot of this, obviously get in here with polish and things like that, some soap and water, and you could kind of clean. This little kind of dinginess is often what you'll see in these years on some of those different panels. Here's the speed control. I've talked about this in the past. I really dig in 66. There's just a little bit of a gap here, and I do think it helps to keep the dash from cracking. My friend Tony and I have talked about this in the past. And in 67, the dash extends all the way up to almost the windshield, and oftentimes you'll see this cracked right here, oftentimes on a 67. I just saw a 67 earlier this week, and it had a huge crack in it. The 66 are a little bit less prone for that. But regardless, this vehicle sitting indoors for 45 plus years was a huge win because it kept the sun, it appears, off the dash. You've got the originality of the trunk. In 66, they did weld in this bar from the factory, so that deficiency in 64, 65 was removed by putting this huge bar in here, and that makes sure the casting pieces don't kind of bend and eventually crack. These pieces in the trunk here are getting a lot harder to find, so it's fantastic when you can find a car that has all of this stuff here, and it may look very basic to you, but certainly if you're looking to have a complete car, that's something worth noting. You'll also note that in 66 you have the pump up here. There's basically some minor changes when it comes to the hydraulic pump in 66. I'll talk about that stuff more in another video when I get to it. But you can see here, they do have the jack and things like that. That's often missing. We can see it appears that it has the Jim Wallace. I always get some of these names mixed up. Wallace's kit here for the upper back panel switch. So this is made out of billet aluminum. This thing is not cheap. And there's a piece in there that will break, and Wallace is really kind of the main guy. John Cashman, I'm going to talk more about this. He's back in business, more coming on that. And I will tell you that he often would use and partner with Jim over the years, from my understanding. Now, when we get underneath the car, I'm going to try to wrap this up in a couple of minutes. Again, I don't want to say that this car is perfect underneath. It's certainly not perfect, but I have seen far worse. And, when you look up in here and you kind of see some of this, it really, to me, this looks like a lot of cosmetic stuff. You could get in here and POR 15 this, which stands for Paint Over Rust 15. It's a brand product. If you wanted to, nothing in here looks structural. It just kind of looks like you've got that normal undercoating color, that you'll see on these cars a lot. And, it's hard to tell if somebody got in here and pressure washed all this. It looks pretty clean, but again, if this car hasn't been on the road for 46 years, in here or on the rear end housing, these things are mammoths, and you can see a little bit of that wetness. A lot of times that's like just from regular oil leaks and things like that. They may have come in here and sprayed it down with a hose before, but we don't really know. We do see what appears to be a new gas tank. So again, they have put some money in the gas tank and the exhaust, which again is going to save you a lot of money right out of the gate. That's what's allowing this car to drive down the road. More than likely, there's no car that's going to sit for 45 years where you don't have to clean out the fuel tank, the fuel lines, redo some of that stuff. Now, if this is the condition they truly got it in just 3 months ago, it shows that they're not just trying to flip it. Maybe it's the family, I think they mentioned, and they said, hey, let's take the car, let's take it to a good mechanic, let's put in $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever they did. And that certainly is a key selling point because they've done some of the hard work. And now you're going to be able to buy a turnkey car that you can cruise down the road. Now, there are 2 videos in here, and I think they did a good job. 2 minutes here, it shows the top cycling, which is fantastic. The gentleman sitting in the car with his foot on the brake, and then also a 66 test drive. He narrates this a little bit, and he kind of talks about the power switch or the windows work, the vent windows work, as well as the seat switch. So this, again, I think is kind of going to be a hidden gem for some. If you're a guy like me or a lady that wants to find a car that hasn't really kind of been messed with, so to speak, and you want some originality, this is a fantastic option. There is one photo that I'll conclude with underneath the car. And again, what I would suggest is, if at all possible, you can look up underneath here. And again, this is not perfect. These little areas are sometimes suspect, but any good body shop, if this just had a little bit of a rust in there, then, typically they can kind of get in here and fix all this. But again, this doesn't look too bad. There is one photo that kind of shows right here, this one. It shows a little bit of the rattiness up in here. Not perfect, certainly, but if this car had been driven in harsher conditions, I think it would be a lot worse off. So there are some things that you would want to take a look at if you could on the lift, but I think that they've done a very honest job to showcase this car, and I think it's a winner in a lot of ways. Now, with it being at $12,600 with 5 days left, and we know Haggerty says, hey, anywhere from $26K to $104K, we've seen these car prices go up. I mean, to me, people are highly desiring convertibles. I mean, I would say it's going to hit 30 grand. If I was looking for a Lincoln, I would contemplate this one. I love the originality of it. That's my final word. What do you think it will sell for? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you for the support, and stay on to rise. ODB, the Lincoln Addict, we out of here.